Hey guys, back on the boat here. You can see we still have the tarp on, the green tarp. This is not a good look for me. Anyways, just wanted to touch base. So our last video was of me showing you how to put the fiberglass skins back on and putting some fiberglass over the seams. That was November. The weather started getting bad, snowing and stuff, so took a break. And now we're nearing the end of March and the weather's better, and we're about 2 months from putting the boat back in the water. So we're in the home stretch and I want to get this project finished up. So let me show you. So you can see here, there's the finished look with the fiberglass laid on the seams, and you can see it's pretty rough. Okay, so the next steps are going to be to basically grind all of this down. It's got to be ground down so it's even with the deck. So I'm going to do that to all the seams. You can also see I still have holes from where I put the fender washers in. So I need to fill those with epoxy so no water can get in there and start rotting all over again. But yeah, so grind this down. Then we're going to sand the seams down, and then I'm going to reevaluate all the seams and just make sure if there any more cloth needs to be laid down that I do it. But I think we're pretty good there. And then what I'll do is fill the seams with epoxy fiberglass fairing compound, just to make sure that everything is contoured right. So then you sand that down. And then what I'm going to look at is, I'm not sure, I might give the entire foredeck a skim coat of the fairing, just so that it's all nice and smooth and there's no blemishes. I'm going to cross that bridge when I come to it, because I'm going to be coating it with anti-skid, and that's going to hide a lot of imperfections as well. So I'll deal with that when I come to it. But once the fairing compound is sanded, then it's priming the deck, and then it's painting on the anti-skid.
Come gather round me, hearties, and a tale I'll sing to you. I swear upon the holy book that every word is true. And if you listen closely, ye may learn a thing or two about the fate that may await ye on the ocean blue. Hey!
Okay, so all the seams have been grinded, ground down, sanded. What I've done is I've taken my acetone and really cleaned them up so they're real nice. And now we're ready to do the fairing. Now this part, it actually scares me almost as much as the cutting of the boat, just because the fairing is the prep work, and if you screw it up, it's gonna show through the paint at the end, and then you gotta sand the paint, the primer, and all that. You gotta go backwards. So hopefully I can get this right. So I've got, what is this, a 12-inch trowel, another one there. You want to use sort of the bigger trowels to move this stuff around, but I do have some smaller ones too, just for sort of the tight corners and things like that. And what we're going to do is just, again, it's the West Systems epoxy and hardener, and what I'm using is their 410 fairing filler. And the cool thing with the West Systems is, I don't know if you guys can see it there, but they have a table on the back just telling you what each filler is good for, and the ratings and stuff by 5 stars. So anyways, that's all we're doing. It's the epoxy, the hardener, and the filler, the fairing filler. I'm going to put it in a big tub here. Alright, so here's what we've got. What's the consistency of that? Molasses, maybe? You want it relatively thick so it's not sliding all over the place. Get to work here. Even with my acetone, there's still a little bit of stuff, so you want to make sure it's clean. And yeah, let's see how this works. And remember, it will heat up. So I have a pretty thick bucket, so I should be okay. But you want to make sure that you just remember it can heat up on you. And this is just like drywall mud. And you don't want to put it on too thick, because then you got to sand it all off. And the thicker it is, the harder it is to get it perfect. Okay, so here is the finished product, I guess, from my first attempt at fairing. It came out pretty well. There's quite a few spots where it's just going to take a bit of light sanding and it's done. There's going to be a few other spots that are going to need to be sanded and then touched up. But I don't know what I was thinking. I thought it would come out more like a drywall putty. I don't know why I would think that. It actually came out, surprise, surprise, like an epoxy. So, but this filler is supposed to make it very easy to sand and shape. So that's what I'm doing next. I've got 80 grit. I used 40 grit to sand everything down the first time, like the deck. Now I'm using 80 grit to sand down the fairing to get it nice and smooth. So I imagine I'm going to have to do this process probably 1 or 2 more times to get it right. And then we're on to fairing the entire deck. Okay, so now I've got all of the seams. They're all sanded down. I've got them all faired out. It's not perfect. It's not supposed to be perfect. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a skim coat of the entire deck. And that's going to hide any imperfections from sanding all the non-skid off. It's going to fill in any of those screw holes that aren't quite full. It's going to fill in any grinder marks or scratches, and it's going to blend the seams into the deck. So that's what we're going to do now. The skim coat is going to be relatively thin. It's going to be a lot thinner than the seam fairing coats. That's because if it's nice and thin, it can flow into any low areas, any holes, any scratches. It'll kind of settle itself out and level itself out. And because it's going to be thin, it's going to make for easy sanding tomorrow. So once that's done, and it's done right, and I'm happy with it, then we are left with prime and paint, and then splash in the water. So we're getting near the end. Okay, so the fairing is all done. You can see it still doesn't look perfect, but it's not supposed to. This is where you want to take your time, because if you screw up here, there's a good chance the blemishes could show up through the paint. So you want to be careful, take your time with your sanding. I did about 4 coats of fairing, sanding them down between each coat, and then the next coats I would use in specific places where I still needed to fill out some lumpy areas or some low spots. So yeah, so 4 coats I used, and I sanded it down with 80 grit. What I noticed was on the seams here, if you went side to side with your hand, like east-west motion, it felt smooth. But when you went north-south or kind of stern to the bow with your hand feeling it, you could feel some lumpy areas. So then what I did was I just used just sandpaper by hand and sanded north-south, and that brought those high spots down to smooth everything out. So I used the orbital sander to bring it down quickly, and then hand sanded the finer areas. So yeah, so this is where we're at. So now I need to kind of sweep it off, clean it off. I'm going to clean it all off with acetone, and then I'm going to put a coat of primer on. So I'm putting the first coat of primer on, and it's surprising how little paint this deck takes. So you can spray this on, but I'm just using a roller, and you just roll it on. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking a brush like this and I'm tipping it off. So when you roll it on, there can be some bubbles and stuff like that. So what you want to do is just tip it, just run your brush along it lightly, and that helps lay the paint down so that there's no bubbles or lines in your paint. So this goes on pretty easy, and it's pretty quick. This might be the simplest part of this whole project, knock on wood. Okay, so there is primer coat number 1. Looks pretty good. I don't know if the camera picks it up, but you know, you can still see the seams, which is fine. I'm gonna sand that down with probably 220, and then I'm gonna put another coat on and see how that looks. I'm hoping that the primer fills in some of the little tiny blemishes that I couldn't get perfect. So, but looking good. So here's the primer I'm using. It's Interlux Pre-Coat, and for a 30-foot boat to prime the entire foredeck, I've used that much paint. So I may have overestimated the amount of paint I was going to use. I'm going to put at least 2 coats on, so I've got lots of paint. And then there's some details here, if you guys can see them. Maybe not, but in temperatures of 10 degrees Celsius, that's the minimum it needs, is 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And that takes 3 hours for it to be dry to the touch. And then you're sanding it in 12 hours. So that works with what we're working with today. And Interlux Pre-Coat. Okay, so there we go. We are getting to the home stretch here. So there's the deck after 4 coats of primer. I probably didn't need to go with 4 coats, but it was pretty scarred up from all the cutting and the grinding. So I did want to make sure that none of the scars bled through. I also had some little imperfections that I did want the extra primer to kind of fill in. But yeah, that's the 4 coats of primer on. So now I need to do the borders with the top coat paint. And then I will I'll probably do 2 coats on the border. And then I'm going to go with the non-skid, and it'll probably be 2 coats of non-skid. So we're essentially 4 coats of paint away from essentially being done this project. Okay, so here's the bright side that I'm using for the border around the foredeck, the border around the non-skid. And what I learned was the gallon, 4 coats over the entire foredeck of the primer only used up about half a gallon. So I went with the quart for the bright side, which should be enough. And they recommended that I use a flattening agent just so that it's not as bright. So I picked up the Interlux flattening agent, and it's simply 1 of the flattening agent to 1 of the bright side. So pretty simple. They just thought it might be way too bright on the eyes. So okay, so we're in the final steps here. I've got the boat primed, that's what you see there. I've got it all taped off. You can see here I've painted the border of the bright side around the hatches and around the edge here. Most boats have that border. It's a nice transition from the non-skid to the bright side. So anyway, so it's all set. I have sanded the primer with 220 just to scuff it up and remove any contaminants. I've also used the acetone on it. So now what we're going to do is simply paint on the non-skid. I'm going to give it 2 coats, and yeah. Okay, so I'm going to use Total Boat Total Tread, the non-skid deck paint. I saw Tula from Tula's in the summer. I saw them use it with no complaints. They also used it outside, so that's what I'm doing. Delos also uses Total Boat, and they haven't really had any complaints or anything about that. So I'm going to try it. My research shows that it is pretty good. The cool thing with Total Boat is the particles that make up the non-skid in the paint. They have like a neutral buoyancy, so you don't have to shake this pail up. All the particles are supposed to stay suspended in the paint. Now, obviously, I am going to shake it up. I'm going to stir it up just to double check, but that's kind of cool, I thought. Just another way to fix any human error. But yeah, so Total Boat, Total Tread, non-skid deck paint. It's a 1-part paint, whereas some non-skid paints are like 2 parts. Sometimes you gotta like spread sand in your paint, and I just thought, again, let's make it easy, especially on me. If it's 1 part, easy as can be, then I shouldn't be able to screw it up. So here we go. 2 coats of this. You're supposed to do them 16 hours between. So I'm going to get 2 coats on over the next day or so, and we should have this boat done. So there you go. There's the final product. The tape has all been removed. The 5 months on and off of completing this foredeck, and this was a huge project. I undertook myself. As I said in previous videos, I was quoted like $25,000, and I was able to do this for about $6,000, and probably about 90 hours worth of work. The finished product has 4 coats of non-skid, and the reason for that was I'm a bit of a dumbass. I didn't read the instructions, and dumbasses should always read the instructions. It said to use a foam roller, and I used a regular roller. The regular rollers tend to trap the non-skid particles in the roller, so it didn't go down evenly. But I got a foam roller and fixed that. The one thing you will see here is the border is off-white, which is quite a transition to the white of the deck. I'm not sure if I like that or not. The problem is the boat is non-skid, or the boat is off-white. The non-skid only came in white, so I'm gonna see how that goes. But I like it. I'm happy with this. I'm super Super happy with how this came out. You can't see any of the scarring from the cuts. It's all, you know, the evenly spread with the non-skid, so it looks good. I'm really, really happy with this DIY job. It was terrifying, but what I hope I was able to portray was, you know, we can do these jobs ourselves. You don't need a professional all the time. If you had to hire a professional, you couldn't afford boating. So this isn't perfect. I kind of gave up the pursuit of perfection and settled on good enough. But I'm really, really happy with this. So anyways, if you have any questions or comments or anything, leave them in the comments section. But this project is done. We are going to splash this boat shortly. Cheers.